Yellow structure is an extrafloral nectary that we call a gland spine, and I'll pass this around, but it's right here at the top, that thing right there.
That thing.
Sometimes they're short and they can be reddish. Most of the time they are yellowish, but you can pass that around, and that is a gland spine. This plant goes to a lot of effort to produce sugar outside of the flowers. So inside of the flowers, the plant has nectaries, and it actually produces nectar in there for flying pollinators, pretty much, to come into the flower. But why would this plant go to a lot of effort to produce nectar down there in the stem? The pollinator's not going to get it. So why do they do it?
Ants.
Well, it actually comes down to, most likely, it is a complete story surrounding ants. And if you know the stories of the ant acacias in the tropics, the acacia trees in the tropics, which no longer are going to be acacia, by the way, they're all including our acacia is going to turn into Senegalia. But they're separating all the acacias of the world. The acacias of the tropics, there are these trees that have hollowed out spines where certain ant species actually live in. So it actually produces a home for them to live up in the canopy of the tree. And then it also, on the new formed leaves, it actually has some nectary things, and it forms these little protein packet-like things for the ants. And the ants go out to the new leaves and they pull them off every day. They've got their food, they've got drinks, they've got everything they want. They have a party every day up in the tree. They never have to leave that tree. Why would that plant do that? Well, a couple of reasons. There is, first of all, one of the more obvious ones in the tropics. Let's say you're producing, well, in the tropics there's a lot of vines. Ants like to have very nicely manicured yards, let's say. And vines like to grab onto everything and cover it. Well, you come up to an ant acacia in the tropics and you'll find, here's a plant that doesn't have one vine growing on it. It's completely denuded of things. Because every vine that grabs onto it, basically they come along and they nip it off. And they keep anything off of it. So that plant has gone to effort, and it's got a lot of sun and nothing's covering it. It's enjoying its time. So it's saying, I'm going to keep my ants around. So it actually has basically evolved this relationship with the ants to do that. Now, that's not happening here. That's definitely not happening here. But why else? Why might it also have ants around? Why would this plant? It's expending a lot of energy. Sugar's not easy to come by. You have to sit around, use water, release oxygen, bring in carbon, blah, blah, blah.
Loosen the soil up around it, maybe?
Okay, that's a good example. Loosen the soil. Loosened soil might have part to do with it. It also might be, these ants may not be completely restricting themselves to the plant. They may have their home down here at the base, which they typically do, but they're probably out foraging through the area, bringing stuff back, may increase the nutrients in the soil around the plant, which would be good to the plant. Maybe the frass, after it's gone through the stomach of the ants and they've eaten what they want and whatever from the environment, they may go poo right in that area around their house. That plant takes advantage of that. It might be cultivating fungi that are around here that actually help. The fungi might help get nutrients in from the soil into the plant. That could be another thing. There's a whole lot of reasons why. One of the more obvious ones, well, what else? What do you think? Protection. Okay, you've got a plant here it's got lots of yummy nutrients inside, water locked up in here. I'd say I'm a little beetle, I'm coming along, and boy, that looks like a juicy little treat for me. So I'm going to come right up here and try to get into that plant. What's going to happen? Ants are very protective. They're extremely territorial. They're like, no way, Jose, you are not coming in here. So they basically will fight off anything, so that helps protect the plant as well. What else? What about the flowers? You usually find the gland spines around here. The flowers of cacti are big and showy. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to sit down. And I'll probably sit on a spine cluster. The flowers of cacti are big and showy. They produce a lot of pollen in those stamens. They also produce quite a bit of nectar. And that pollen and nectar in the flowers, that is yummy to a lot of insects, and that nectar is good for lots of things. So let's say I'm another little beetle around here and saying, there's my jackpot right up there on top. I'm going to want to come over and steal that pollen and get some nectar out of there. The ants are going to say, no way, you're not doing it. So the plant is also protecting it that way. And at the same time, one thing that's helping evolutionarily is that those ants are stopping anything that would crawl up here, take some nectar, or even grab pollen or whatever, and it basically promotes outcrossing. It promotes flying pollinators like bees and butterflies to come in to that flower. They don't really mess with the ants, and then they go off to another plant. So you're promoting outcrossing and genetic diversity in that. So probably all of those things combined are important and the reason that it has gland spines. But really understudied. There's a guy at UCSD now that's just doing some new studies on these extrafloral nectaries, because the plant goes to a lot of effort to do that. And certain species of beryls have it more obviously than others. Did everybody see the gland spines? Are they still going around? But it does produce a sugary nectar. One other thing that I've seen that might be a reason is the ants seem to prefer those extrafloral nectaries than to the nectar inside. I hardly ever see ants inside of the flower of a cactus. You see beetles and other things in there, but almost never see ants. So they seem to prefer there, and boy, they just sit and they suckle right on those things. And they'll run up and down the stem. You'll know if it's active if you just touch a spine like that. These little suckers come out and they bite and sting. They'll release formic acid as well. They are quite territorial. One cholla in Baja California, I went out one night, and it seems to you see the nectar much more at night when it's cooled down, probably because the humidity's not that temperature's not as high. And I think if we had like 20 different kinds of insects all over on this one cholla species, the Cylindraceus cholla. And some of them were feeding on the extrafloral nectaries. Nobody's done studies on that in Baja or on chollas that I'm aware of. So that's kind of an important thing that hasn't been studied. One thing that's happening on that this person at UCSD is studying on beryl cacti, our coast beryl, is the introduction of Argentinian ants and the impact on that. Argentinian ants do not behave like our native ants, and they're actually displacing, outcompeting our native ants, and they seem to not function the same way as far as efficiency in these extrafloral. They go inside, they steal all kinds of crap from the plant. And these could be, our coast beryl is relatively rare. It's very pocketed and fragmented in its distribution, pretty much surrounded by urbanization everywhere in its distribution. And the Argentinian ant is really taking over in these areas. There could be long-term implications for the reproduction of those species. And he's, I think, seeing some reduced seed set and because of reduced pollination on areas that have these Argentinian ants. So we're going to see, it'll be interesting to see what kinds of things going in there. There's not much you can do about it. Argentinian ants are here to stay, unfortunately. But they are definitely wreaking havoc in more ways than just coming into your house and getting into sugar and water in our natural environment. So that is something that, unfortunately, I don't think they're over in the desert yet, or maybe in the urban areas they're starting to get in. But does anybody know? In Borrego, have you found Argentinian ants?
What are the little black ants that always come into the kitchen, little tiny guys? Are those Argentinians?
Well, they usually are, but there's native ones that are really small too, so you'd have to have them ID'd. There's a lot of ant species out there. Yeah. So anyway, that's a beryl cactus.
Does it produce nectar all year long, or at certain times throughout the year?
You know, I can't answer that. I cannot answer that. I definitely see it more when they're producing flowers. But you don't also want to shut off the tap, so to speak, for these ants, or the ants are going to leave. So they probably do produce some. That one is obviously not even producing flower buds, but that looks like a pretty fresh gland spine. So it's probably sustaining ants in that area. I'd have to look really close to see if we see any ants going up and down.
I did see some ants on
Did you see them now? Okay, so they probably are producing it year round. But I know they produce even more during flower season. I just happen to see them more often then. And you see lots of ants, because I'm constantly reaching in for flowers, pull them off for specimens and things, and boy, the ants are all over you.
And which cacti
have them and which don't in the lower Colorado?
Well, definitely the barrels have them. And well, we only have the one barrel here in Anza-Borrego. But as you go into Baja, off the charts number of barrel cacti, and most of them have